So, what really kept me tied to the job? Let me think about it in several buckets. One thing, of course, is if it had not kept me engaged and challenged and, satisfied, I definitely would have left. In the bank, the good thing is that you do get a transfer every 4 or 5 years, okay, towards the beginning. And then as you go higher up, that interval becomes smaller and smaller. So in a way, as you go from job to job, you do have a chance of doing something different. So it is not necessary that if you are doing retail banking, you will remain in retail banking forever.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. My guest today, Arundhati Bhattacharya, was the first woman chairperson of the State Bank of India, India's largest bank. In 2016, she was listed as the 25th most powerful person in the world. The journey of this small-town girl who grew up in Bhilai, in a blue-collar neighborhood, to the most coveted seat in India's corporate world is nothing short of a fairy tale. Her book, titled Indomitable, is a riveting account of this journey. From developing corn in her fingers because of holding her pen for long hours, to taking money from the office watchman for a late-night bus, to pushing her broken-down car through a jungle, to balancing ledgers that weighed over 10 kilograms, and doing her masters while working, Arundhati's journey to the very top is a fascinating study of working women in this country, more than anything else. And to my pleasant surprise, she spoke to me more like one as well, and less with the air of a powerful leader. A very little known story is that when she became a chairperson, she couldn't print her title as chairperson on the business card. Because to change it from chairman to anything else, one needed to convene the parliament. This aspect of not having a precedent will be a common thread throughout her story. The chat, like her book, was hugely inspiring for me. And both had moments where I found myself smiling broadly. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast. Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Arundhati. How are you doing and where are you talking to us from?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you. And thank you for getting me on this podcast, or rather inviting me on this podcast. And I'm calling in from Mumbai, actually, from my residence in Mumbai.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I have to confess, I'm a huge fanboy, even more so, after the book. And there is a lot of things that I wanted to talk to you about the book, but I'm going to try and keep it to about 45 minutes to an hour, which is really the format of our show. The first thing that, that really took me in was the title of the book. Right? Where, in fact, it's more the byline. It says, Indomitable, a working woman's notes on life. And on this show, we've spoken about how professional lives are very different for men and women in this country. And you have achieved some extraordinary feats in your professional journey. I just thought, this line made it so much more approachable, the book, and so much more human. And it really is all about that. You have a lot of anecdotes on your life and your experiences. I wanted to talk to you about, a slightly larger picture before I dive into the book, which is one of the things that people like me who, probably are achieving a fraction of what you've done professionally are struggling a lot with is in terms of time, right? You're a mother. You worked yourself up in an organization for many, many years. You've been the chairperson of the largest bank in the world. What are your learnings in terms of conquering time? I thought that's a good place to start this conversation.
So, first and foremost, I'll talk about time, but before that, let me talk a little bit about the title. And,
Yes.
I really had it only as a working woman's notes on life, work, and leadership. The word indomitable was actually contribution for HarperCollins. And I was a little resistant to that, mainly because, I was an Asterix comic fan when I was young. In fact, I have all the Asterix comics, okay? And whenever you say indomitable, in my mind, the picture is of the indomitable Gauls. So I see a little man with big mustaches, Okay. And that was not what the picture I had of myself. So I was a little resistant to this, but the publishers insisted that, it had to be one word and it had to be a powerful word. So ultimately I gave in to that. In fact, very recently at one of the other fireside chats that I was having, I was asked that, why a working woman? Had I
Hmm.
been a man, would I have said a working man? And that also gave me pause for thought, because it's true that had I been a man, I wouldn't have said a working man, because a man is supposed to work. In that case, do you really mean to say that a woman who is at home is not working? Means, there are so many connotations to that which you don't really appreciate till somebody sort of, points it out to you. So,
Hmm.
yes, that title, when I wrote it, I did think of it as the memoirs of a person who's actually led life not only within the house but also outside, regardless of the fact that people inside the house also work a huge amount. I am completely cognizant of that. So it
Hmm.
was nothing at all, not meant in order to sort of, to belittle what is being done within the house. In fact, the people there sometimes I feel work much more than those of us who go out and leave many of our responsibilities to others. But having said that, yes, I have, in a way, the title overall sort of expresses what I really wanted to get across in that book. And the
Hmm.
main thing that I wanted to get across in that book was that, you can dream to be anything. And whatever you want to dream, you can do it wherever you are. It doesn't matter that you have to be in this country or outside this country. Doesn't matter whether you have to be in a particular, career or within the home. But whatever and wherever you are, you can dream and you can ultimately, make it come true. You have to just keep striving for it. I think that's the gist of what I had wanted to sort of express. Now, in respect of time, I have always felt that that's my biggest enabler as well as my
Hmm.
biggest enemy, because just seems to get away from you, in the
Yeah.
sense that, no matter how much you want to do, at the end of the day, it's limited by the amount of time you have. So, you have to find tricks of how you make the best of the time you have. One of the things, and very simple things, for instance, is that if I take something from some place, I will always place it back exactly there. Okay. In the sense that when you look for it again, you just go for it. You don't waste your time searching as to where it is. Okay. These are simple tricks, but they help you in the sense that they help you with compressing the time.
Hmm.
When I was in my earlier organization, even now sometimes, a lot of people tell me that, your outfits are all very matched. I used to wear a lot of these junk neck pieces. Okay, but very often they were exactly matching with the outfit that I had. And people would ask me, how much time are you spending in order to determine your outfits? And actually, I'd be spending very, very little. But what I
Hmm.
do have is all my neck pieces are color coded and kept in separate boxes with the name of the color on it. So that when I'm putting on something, I quickly just go for the color that I want and I can quickly pick it out. So, there is a method to the madness for all of us. We have a method as to what we do as soon as we wake up in the morning. And there has to be some amount of discipline in the way we handle that in order to be able to make the best of your time. Because no
Hmm.
matter what you do and how hard you try, I believe everybody is short of time. Everybody. There is
Yeah.
nobody who really has the luxury of it.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, what you said about the neck pieces reminded me of something that Steve Jobs had mentioned, that the whole
Mhm.
reason why he wears the same turtleneck is that he doesn't have to waste time choosing anything else. So that's so brilliantly put. Now that I've asked you the question that was burning in my head, I wanted to start with where you started. You're from an industrial town. Talk to us a little bit about, which is of course far away from Bombay. Talk to us a little bit about growing up and childhood. What kind of a childhood did you have growing up?
I think, in a way, I had quite a happy childhood, actually speaking, in the sense that I had a lot of independence. As in the book, I have stated, my brother was not too well. He needed to be taken care of. He was also, sort of the only son. In those days, though I don't really like to say it, but it is a fact that in those days, sons probably got a little more importance than daughters did, which of course, was not the case so much with me, and especially from my father. He treated both of us the same. In fact, probably he gave me a little more leeway than he allowed my brother. But overall, because of his health and other issues, I was sort of left to grow up by myself. Also, I was not a very troublesome child. I was actually quite mature and quite, sort of took care of myself. So to that extent, I feel it was quite happy because I could do what I wanted. If I wanted to read a book while instead of studying, nobody really came after me. If I wanted to do something, that was not wildly out of the way. And most of the time I was not a wild child. So, quite okay that way. And that is why I think, leaving children to their own devices sometimes is probably very important. Nowadays, we try and sort of structure every minute of every day of a child's time, how much time the child will spend in going to coaching, how much time they'll spend in singing, how much time they'll spend in dancing. Everything has to be structured. Our lives were far more unstructured. And in a way, I think that made it really quite delightful.
Right. I'm assuming, growing up like all of us, you would have had multiple different dreams of what you wanted to do with your career.
Yep.
I would be surprised if being the first woman chairperson of SBA was one of them. But tell us some of the dreams that we might not have thought of, we might not associate with you.
The first thing that I, of course, wanted to be, I think, which I was very keen on, was to be a biochemist. And again, that's there in the book. Somebody made a little fun of it, asking me whether I should instead consider being a kitchen chemist. And I think that was my first brush with stereotyping, gender stereotyping. And it really offended me quite a bit. But as I went on with my studies, I realized that, chemistry, especially organic chemistry, was not something that I liked. At that point of time, of course, I blamed my teacher, but I believe when I look at it, with hindsight, that the fault was also mine. I didn't just like it. It's as simple as that. So that biochemist dream died. And then, it was a dream of still studying medicine or zoology or something, to do with the life sciences. And there again, I did get an entry into the medical colleges in Calcutta, but because there were no hostels that I could access, or there just weren't any hostels. So I'd have to stay in working women's hostels where the conditions at that point of time were absolutely pathetic. I really couldn't bring myself, I suppose my ambition was not strong enough to bring myself to stomach that. And then there were some considerations of the fact that, studying medical in those days used to take a long time. And my father was on the verge of retirement. He did not have a pension. His was not a service that gave a pension. So there was some amount of pressure that I sort of created on myself, not again from my family's side, but I did it on myself that, I wanted to be independent by the time I was 21. I wanted to be very, very sure that by 21, I would not need to be supported by my parents. I would support myself. So that was an aim that I had. So having put all of that together, and given the fact that, the principal of my school appeared to think that I was really good in communication in English, my father felt that probably this is an area that I could pursue. And again, the principal of our school, he sort of convinced my father that there were a lot of opportunities if I studied English, whether it be in the area of academics or it be in the area of journalism. So he was of the view that this is something that I could do and do well. So that's how I ended up studying English, not really knowing what it is that I would become. And in fact, becoming a banker was the last thing in my mind. There wasn't a banker in all 14 generations of my family. I didn't even know what a banker did. My mother thought that they simply counted notes. I had never been inside a bank other than to go to the locker with my mother, and that too, very rarely, once in a while. Never done a banking transactions. So, banking really happened because at that point of time, we were all looking for careers. And we found that to get a career anywhere, you needed contacts. And I didn't have contacts. My father was in the steel plant. He didn't have contacts. So, we needed to do something which were like All India merit exams. And in the All India merit exams, there could be two things that you could do. You could try for the IAS or you could try for, the banks. And in the IAS, I found that you needed to have knowledge, at least till the postgraduate level, of a subject other than that of a language. And I had only studied a language, which meant that I would need to at least stay at home for a year or two and study up on a subject that I could then write the IAS exam on. So, with that in mind, I thought the next best thing was to try for banking, and that's how I ended up there.
Right. And you would also, go on and correct me if I'm wrong here, if memory serves right. You would continue your post graduation after you joined the bank, and when you had a full time bank job, isn't it? Talk to us a little bit about the early days of being in a bank. Like you said, it's a new environment for you. You do not know what it was like earlier. How did those first 4-5 years pan out for you?
Well, the first 4 or 5 years were actually, I would say, it was a discovery of a whole new world. First of all, coming in straight from university hostel into banking itself. The first few days were quite amazing because, we were really looked after well at the staff college when we went in for our orientation courses. Given the royal treatment, and again, very, very impressed with the way, we were waited on hand and foot. Coming from a hostel where you had to go out and get tea in a kulhar, to one where, in the morning, a white-coated, white-gloved waiter would come and pour your tea, was a very long shot, I must say. And it made us feel quite special. But from there, when I landed up in the branches, there was a big drop again. Because here, the kind of work we were made to do in the initial stages was mainly very manual, very repetitive, mindless, soulless work. And frankly, I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for it at all. But the fact of the matter is, because of the sheer volume of the work we were doing, it was a big challenge. And anyway, I'm always a sucker for a challenge. So, well, if you're given it, you try and do it in the best possible way that you can. Ended up getting a corn on my finger, on my forefinger, because I'd have to grip the pen really hard in order to make the carbon copies visible. So we had to have carbon copies of everything we were doing. So initially, of course, it was a little bit of a disorienting kind of an experience. I didn't also, in the branch that I was posted, there were no toilets for lady executives. So we were required to use the one that was in the branch manager's, adjoining the branch manager's room, which was also at that point quite embarrassing, but we soon grew a pretty thick skin about it because that's the way it was. And you had to manage. And of course, on top of that, I would be going home pretty late in the night, at 10 in the night. And then I had my studies to do because the MA exams were coming up. So, it was really, really quite stressful and difficult. But having said that, I would still say that those days actually are very formative days. Because they taught us that, you had to work really, really hard in order to complete whatever was given to you. Hard meaning this is manual labor, means this is not, something that involves a lot of brain power or anything of the sort, but sheer physical stamina to stay put and do it. And in a way, it hardens you, it prepares you for things going forward, because the life of a banker in those days, though my parents at that point of time thought that I would be sitting in a small closed room doing just interacting with people, it was anything but. When we went through our probation period, we were posted in rural branches. We had to go into the countryside. At one point of time, one of the times that I went into the village, the jeep got stuck in the mud. It had to be, literally pushed out from there. And then by the time I reached home, it was 2 a.m. So, those kinds of experiences are quite, formative experiences for one. And those days, there were no mobiles, remember. So there was no way of reaching out, no way of calling for help. But the fact is, they teach you how to handle, all kinds of situations. And more or less, I think, prepare you for life going forward.
Right. In fact, as you were talking, I remember one incident that you talk about, which is you were so late in the office, the night watchman, you had to actually borrow money from the night watchman to pick a bus.
That's right.
I'm assuming that while you might not have known it at that point, these early days would have also given you a very deep window to the challenges and the processes that you will need to fix and solve for when you took up a leadership position later on in this organization. Will I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I think you would be. Because, as you watch others work, you find what are the things that seem to be resonating and what are the things that are not. Okay. So if you saw, if the kind of people I had as my superiors when I started working, some of them were highly reasonable people. Some of them were very nurturing. Some of them were absolutely standoffish and wouldn't do a thing for you. Others, again, used fear as a weapon. And I would watch and see how it impacted people around me, as well as how it impacted me as well. I knew for a fact that, where I'm concerned, I get motivated by, two or three words of praise. That's all that was required to get me working really, really hard. Whereas there were other people who wouldn't get motivated by that at all. They would just blow it off saying, ha ha, big, he's making a big show of the whole thing only in order to dupe you into working. Okay. So these people needed something else. So, as I went through all of these experiences, I would often try and find what is it that motivates people? What is it that challenges them and makes them work harder than they normally would? And, these were a lot of things that came from observation, came from looking at the way people were reacting to certain situations, to certain stimuli. Sometimes, you would also find competition amongst yourselves. That seems to work very well. How, and it's not necessarily, again, remember, we are in the public sector, so there isn't any money to be thrown about. Okay. Everybody gets paid the same. Whether you work hard, you don't work hard, your salary check is going to be the same. So why will you work at all? Why should you work? You can just as well be a shirker and you'll still get by. But the fact of the matter is people still do work. Why do they work? They work because it gives them a sense of fulfillment, a sense of overcoming a challenge, the sense of meeting a goal, the sense of self-worth. So, these were all very qualitative features. These were not quantitative things. Yeah. And it was very interesting for me to watch how people were reacting to such stimuli.
Yeah. Back to your story. At this point, you're going through physical, mental, and all other kind of challenges. What is your relationship with SBI at this point? Are you thinking of a long-term career here?
To tell you the truth, I didn't really think that, about where I would end up or where I wanted to end up. At the time of our orientation classes, we had a number of senior executives coming in and talking to us. And one of them said that, the chairman in SBI normally have worked, or rather normally have joined this institution in the same way that you have joined. Okay. And they may have sat at this very same place. And I'm sure all of us in that batch then for a moment wondered whether one of us would be chairman someday. Okay. But I think, the moment we joined the branches, all of those thoughts simply disappeared. It was more a struggle to survive every single day and try and make it to the next level. That's all our, goal was at any point of time, especially mid-career. Yes, you would look forward to maybe good postings. You would look forward to working with certain people who had a great reputation. But that's about all that you really wanted. Because, there was nothing that you were going to get in the form of money. You knew the amount of money that you were going to get. There was nothing to look forward to over there.
Right.
What was it that we were looking forward to? We were looking forward to learning new things. We were looking forward to getting challenging assignments. We were looking forward to maybe being posted in good places. We were looking forward to working with a few people who we really felt, we respected. So those were the sort of things that we were working for at that point of time. Were we working towards a goal of becoming chairman? No. That came in much, much later. When maybe we were 2 or 3 steps away from it, that was the time when these thoughts started coming in that is it feasible for me to try and aim for that top job? Or is it something that can never happen? Because, it is not only a question of whether you're doing a good job, but it's also a question of how much time you have left. When do you get your promotions? When do the vacancies occur? Because for us, all promotions were vacancy dependent. In fact, mid-career, when I was the assistant general manager, I remained an assistant general manager for 8 long years because we never got a call for promotion. So that is the place when the pyramid starts becoming like a pillar. So the number of vacancies at the deputy general manager level are very small. and only 3 times of that number based on seniority would be called for the promotion interview. So for 8 years, I didn't get called at all. I got called only in the ninth year. So it all depends, on all of these equations. And it's a very difficult game to play. It's not like snakes and ladders that you know exactly where the ladders are and where the snakes are. It's sort of ridden with snakes where you don't think there are snakes, and there could be sudden ladders as well. So you don't start even thinking on these lines till you are much closer to the top. It is only when you are very much closer to the top then you begin to think about these permutation combinations.
I lead a creative organization just in the business of advertising. And the average age of my team is probably around 25 to 27. And there is this recurring thing that I'm seeing, with this group, that after spending 4 or 5 years in a role or in an organization, they tend to call themselves as, oh, I'm a furniture in this place, I'm a dinosaur in this place. My counter to all of that is to tell them that the fact that you spend 7 8 years in an organization does not really mean that you've done poorly in your career. It's quite the contrary. You've been in a place long because you love the culture, you love the job probably, and you like being here. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. You have spent a lifetime in one organization, though it's a completely different era. Did you ever think of working somewhere else, especially with not knowing, where the ladders are, like you said a little earlier?
So, what really kept me tied to the job? Let me think about it in several buckets. One thing, of course, is if it had not kept me engaged and challenged and, satisfied, I definitely would have left. In the bank, the good thing is that you do get a transfer every 4 or 5 years, okay,
Right.
towards the beginning. And then as you go higher up, that interval becomes smaller and smaller. So in a way, as you go from job to job, you do have a chance of doing something different. So it is not necessary that if you are doing retail banking, you will remain in retail banking forever. So over a period of 40 years and 1 month that I spent in the bank, I must have had something like 13 or 14 entirely different jobs. So I've been in retail in small towns, in big towns, in metros. I've been in corporate banking, looking at small accounts, looking at large corporate accounts. I've looked after treasury. I have, been an investment banker. I even had a chance of setting up new businesses from within the bank, which again, very few people have a chance to do. I looked after HR for a while. So, if you look at all the profiles that I had and all the portfolios that I handled, one was very, very different from the other. And along with the fact that, they were changing my portfolio, they were also changing the place that I was staying. So that on the personal front also, I had new challenges to overcome. There were a lot of new learnings, new schools to find for my child, new ways and cuisines to, taste, new people to get along with, new ways of working. And again, believe me, the way people work in Lucknow and the way people work in Karnataka are entirely different. They are two separate countries, actually, the way work happens. India is not one country. It's many countries all rolled into one. And sometimes, because I've seen the length and breadth of the country, I marvel at the fact that we are still together. Because they're so different, so very different, in cultures, in cuisines, in language, in customs, in ways and manners. Everything is different. So, as you are learning a new job, you are also having to learn these new things. And as you become senior, you are actually getting positioned as a leader of a team, even though you may not know anything about that job. So you are literally learning and leading every day. And because of that, what it does is it keeps you challenged, it keeps you interested, it keeps you on your toes. And basically, if you are able to master this, it makes you happy. And that's the reason that I stayed on. Having said that, there is also one element that, probably worked with our generation, which probably our current generation doesn't have. Our generation was that generation that supported its earlier generation as well as the next generation.
Yeah.
So for us, security was a big deal. Okay. And the bank did provide you security. Today, because the children do not need to take care of their earlier generation and normally have enough left over so that even the next generation they know will be able to take care of themselves. As a result of that, today's generation does not have that overarching need for security. And that gives them the freedom to experiment. Plus, you also must realize that in those days, the kind of opportunities people have today were not available then. You could either become a doctor or an engineer. A middle class child was expected to become either a doctor or an engineer, otherwise, you were a failure. There were only three categories, nothing beyond that. So, actually, I am in the failure category, not in the, ones that did well. So, basically, I'm telling you that what I'm trying to tell you is that the way we used to look at things then and the way children look at things now, there is a huge difference between them.
Yeah. As we're talking about your time in SBI, it's obviously very important that we also talk about the phrase called glass ceiling. And you talk about this in many different ways, throughout the book. You already, in this conversation itself, spoke about how very, very early on in life, you were exposed to the realities of stereotyping. And when I look at and when I engage with people in my family and my friends, from your generation, it's painfully aware to me that your awareness of stereotypes is very high, right? Because it's been hard-coded into you as you progressed in life, both at home as well as at work, and even in the society for that matter. So even with this awareness, I would assume that there are many times where you would have been really, really surprised with what's going on. You would have been really shocked with going on, even with this awareness. I recall, I forget now whether it is in the book or is in one of your interviews, you speak about a time where you saw that about 80 odd people were promoted and none of them were actually women. And then you took that conversation to the chairman at that time. I wanted to talk to you. I want to ask you, what are probably those one or two incidents that you can talk about where, in spite of all of this, you've still been shocked at the kind of a stereotyping that existed?
The stereotyping that is there, we understand it. And what really and truly shocks me is, even today, for instance, what shocks me is that, for instance, if I take my home, I travel a lot, I work pretty hard as well. There are, for instance, invitations, say a wedding at home and things like that amongst relatives. And many a times, my husband is required to attend on his own because I just can't make the time. And invariably, he comes back in a foul mood because, relatives have been talking to him about the fact that I haven't been attending these functions and why is it that he's not able to make me come. So stuff like that, when it comes after so many years of this, it really and truly amazes me. I mean, how can anybody talk about these things even in this day and age? I like meeting people just as much as the other person. If I'm not able to make it, it's just because, not because I'm lazy or because, I have my nose in the air or anything of the sort. They know me well enough now to realize that I'm not a person of that kind, but just because I've not been able to make time. Now, to give grief to my spouse because he's okay with it is not something that I like. It does make me feel extremely bad, but that's the way it is. And I just don't understand that how in this day and age people can still think on these lines that, as a spouse, my first duty should be towards attending events that, that are important very much to them. But, well, there could be other more important things that we need to do. And why that importance is not acknowledged and understood and accepted. So, there are many things like this that really and truly shock me. Similarly, for instance, I have a few colleagues, ex-colleagues still in the bank. For instance, very recently I've been talking to a few of them about one of these ex-colleagues whom I have mentored for a long time because she's a single mother with a young daughter. And the kind of, insensitivity I have seen regarding how to position her or where to position her or why, some amount of flexibility should be given to her. It really and truly shocks me. This day and age, and we are still not cognizant of the fact that a child needs a few things and that you have to be flexible in order to allow the parent to provide for it. And if the parent is a single parent without the support of anybody else, that they need the organization to understand that this is very much a requirement. It's not something that, it's not a luxury. It's a requirement. The fact that, these organizations don't understand that, it somehow and really and truly, it not only shocks me, in a way, it enrages me. Because I think, this is really not fair. This is not the way things are meant to be. And people need to understand that, being flexible doesn't mean that you are allowing indiscipline. Being flexible doesn't mean that you are, giving somebody undue advantage. Being flexible means that you are being supportive and that you are creating people who ultimately will actually serve the organization far, far better.
Right. You mentioned you mentoring a single mother, and that prompted this thought in my mind that the other cross that women bear more than men is that they're constantly being judged for their personal roles or their familial roles. Right? You're a wife, you're a mother of a specially able child, and you're also, one of the most senior leaders in the country. How was your experience in terms of sometimes answering to yourself, because women also of this country have very high standards for themselves, and to others in terms of, okay, am I being a good mother? Am I being a good person, a good family component? All of these. What has been that experience for you?
So, this is something that often gets asked, and, women always carry along with them a huge burden of guilt. I personally feel, that this is self-created.
Yes.
This is a kind of self-flagellation that we do, which we need to maybe, train ourselves not to do it. Because, even if you were dedicating 24 hours of the day to your family and child, even then, what is the guarantee that you would be able to do everything that you are expected to do? So, this is really something where I think we indulge a little bit in self-pity. It would help us if we stop doing it. I know that it's very difficult to control oneself. I do it quite a bit myself. And whenever I catch myself doing it, I sort of, tell myself, stop, enough is enough. I often talk about it to, many of my younger colleagues, that don't let society impose its standards on you. Your standards are your own and you should be able to live by it. But having said that, once in a while, for instance, yesterday, I had some sudden visitors. They had said that they would come and I had forgotten actually. And there is some construction work going on in the house. So the living room was covered in dust, absolutely covered. And these people came in, and obviously they had already told me they'd be coming. And I felt so terribly embarrassed because, well, that's not the way I normally, I'm quite a house proud person and my house is normally perfectly well kept. But this was one of those days where I hadn't, done what I needed to do. And there was this work going on. So I really and truly was more embarrassed. They were fine with it, like I don't even know whether they noticed it. But I was noticing all the dust and the, things out of place and stuff like that, and literally dying 1,000 deaths. Now, after they had left, I sort of sat myself down and talked to myself to say, well, this is it. You are doing some job. You forgot about somebody coming. So, well, doesn't matter. They saw you at a moment when you are not, as good as you could possibly be. And how does that matter? It's two people or three people's opinion. Maybe they'll talk about it to a few other people. Yeah. But how does it really make a difference to yourself? So once in a while, actually speaking, I think we need to give a good talking to ourselves, to get out of these kinds of moods.
Yeah, because, I'm going to turn 45 and I've not had a single conversation with any of my male friends where any of them are doubting whether they're being a good host in a house or whether being a good father, etc. Right? It's just a cross that only one gender in this country seems to be bearing. Right? Moving away slightly from your personal journey to the organizational journey, like I said at the beginning, there have been times, as you write in the book, where you've used ledgers in the organization, lined them up and used them as tables as well. And you've been, immersed in the organizational culture, of this place for decades. When you became, the chairperson, what are some of the things that you did to change the organizational culture? Because you make it very evident that that's something that was very important for you, right? And I always feel that a digital transformation is a subset of that, right? Because they're both interlinked at very different levels. What are some of the things that you wanted to change in this organization after you became the chairperson?
I think 2 or 3 things that I really was very keen about changing. And I do believe that, perception is one of the most difficult things that anybody who takes up the job of changing perceptions is probably taking up the most difficult job. One thing that I wanted very clear to most people was that I believed in a culture of collaboration. I'm not saying that people believe before me didn't believe in the same, but I wanted to actually walk the talk and make it very clear that the collaboration started from me. Okay. So my earlier organization, the 18th floor, is the floor on which the top management sits. That is, the chairman and the MDs used to sit there at that point of time. And it was generally known that at all points of time, not everybody was seeing eye to eye. It was generally sort of known. That is one thing that I tried very hard to create, which is create a unified team where, people would understand that all of these people are on the same page. Now, does that mean I would brook no, divergence of views? That was not it at all. And I was also very clear that, I only wanted to take up those initiatives where I had more or less everybody on board. Getting everybody on board often is, ideal kind of a situation, doesn't really happen. But the idea was that everybody could say their piece, everybody could speak their mind. If I could convince them, great. If they could convince me, great. And there were times when I changed course. But if at the end of the day, there was no complete meeting of minds, then I would have the prerogative of deciding which way we would go. And at that point of time, everybody would pull together. There would be no divergence that would be shown to the external world. Now, this is something that I tried to do, and I hope I could get this across to at least some people, because it is very important, that some of the things that you want the organization to do actually flows from the top. Similarly, I wanted to ensure that people felt that they had the ability to try out things of their own. They had the space to be able to use their own brains and their own ideas. But whatever they did, they would need to try and either succeed quickly or fail fast. You wouldn't have a whole long period of time in which to keep trying out stuff and not actually producing results. Okay. So there was far more openness that I tried to bring in. I remember one of my seniors telling me once that, you come to this central management committee meetings and open your mouth only to eat cashews. I didn't want it to be like that. I really and truly wanted people to open their mouths in order to express their opinions. Sometimes these management meetings, sometimes they became a free-for-all with a lot of cross-talk. And people would say, what is this? This is becoming, more like a bazaar rather than, a meeting. And I would have to shush everybody and then stop the cross-talk and allow people to go, in a more orderly fashion. But every once in a while, everybody speaking, to me, indicated the passion that everybody had. Okay. And to me, that was a good thing. It didn't matter that maybe we wasted 5 minutes of crosstalk, but it showed that everybody was passionately involved, that they were not there just eating the cashews. And by the way, I banned the cashews. They were bad for all of us. They were increasing our weight, all of us. So, instead I'd have something like amla or something which people wouldn't be willing to take too much of. But the fact is that, getting people to stop. And that's again another thing that I used to tell my guys, that never ever snap at a junior. If you snap at a junior more than once, that junior will never open their mouth in front of you. And in fact, one of my juniors told me that, madam, in all these discussions, please hold your views and you speak last. Because otherwise what happens is if you speak first, a lot of people will simply dive in and, affirm your views. Right. Because that's what they know what to do best. So, there were a lot of learnings that went on. But I think most of all, what I feel that, as chairman, that I was able to create an atmosphere where people were really eager to come in and work. People enjoyed the fact that they were in this organization, that they were getting their space in the sun, so to speak, that they were able to speak their mind, they were able to think of new things. They had the space to experiment. So, basically, I used to tell everybody that, if you're waking up in the morning and then feeling like crawling down, under the blankets all over again and not getting up, then there's something wrong. You should look for some other place to work in. I didn't want that to happen. I wanted it to be a place where people would want to come back to work. Of course, there were bad days. There were days when you really didn't want to go to work. Some big problem or the other is there. But those are far fewer than the days when you would get up all energized and wanting to go and work.
Right. You also make it sound very simple, but I'm telling you why I feel that way is also that in private companies, in the private sector, right, where it is very, very much easier to bring in change, people struggle so much. But in your innings, there I feel are two different aspects. One, of course, is the sheer process that have been laid down. In fact, one of the incidents you talk about is when you became the chairperson, you couldn't get the right title printed on the card. And I would love to hear that incident from you. So there is adherence to process, and hence change becomes much slower. And then the other part of it is also, you also had to work with many different entities, employee unions being one of them. And in fact, there is an instance that you often talk about where you say that you asked one of the union leaders to actually do a bank job, which he wasn't necessarily supposed to do, or required to do, rather. Right? How did you sort of work with all of these constraints and still drive the change that you wanted?
Actually speaking, I don't think, that if you really want to get something done and if people believe that you're trying to do it for the good of the organization, that they're really going to stand very firmly in the way. For instance, some of the things that we did I've talked about it in the book, we wanted a meeting room floor. And this was very important because we didn't want people to come into all the floors. There is something called banking secrecy. There are a lot of papers lying around. We were still a very paper-based organization. And I didn't want, outsiders, visitors to be visiting every floor, roaming around in them. I wanted everybody to be on one floor for the securities, from the security angle. And we found that one floor was the 10th floor because both banks of lift went to the 10th floor. So it made it easier for people to access that floor. But that floor was actually, in the hands of the unions and the associations for the last 40 years since the building had been built. And everybody told me it would be impossible. They would never give it up. But actually speaking, we did manage to convert it into a meeting room floor. And really speaking, was there a single day strike or black bands or slogan shouting? Nothing. When you explain with the rationale to people, and when they realize from your side you are doing it for the best of the organization and not in order to, just get back at them for something or the other, very often they will see the rationality of it and give way. The kind of rampant unionism that we saw, when I had entered the organization, in any case, that had, become far more rational. And during my time, at least, I saw that if I put things rationally to them, if I asked them for something which they believed was for the good of both the organization and the membership of that organization, they actually, cooperated. They gave way. So I think, it's not that sometimes I think, we make ourselves believe that we are, hostage to a situation when we really are not. Some of the things that I did at that point of time were quite different. For instance, we had created a fund in order to work alongside of fintechs. And the model was that there would be an external set of people who would determine who we could work with. And we could put a certain amount as seed capital, or we could create a JV, or we could do a transaction-based pricing with these external fintechs so that, we could work in collaboration with them. Because I realized that many of them had solutions which we didn't have. They had solutions and the agility. I had the trust and the customers. So, if we could join together, we could actually be a great combination. That point of time, some such scheme was not even in the offing. Nobody had even thought about it. But we put it up to the board. We put in all the checks and balances that the board wanted as to how these would be determined. And then it went through. So we had this corpus, with which we could at least try and approach some of the fintechs whose solutions appeared to be very, very suitable for us, instead of trying and creating all of that ourselves. Now, nobody had done this. Does this mean it couldn't be done at all? Didn't mean that. The board is consisting of rational people. They understand what is right, what is wrong. They understand what is being done for the organization. As long as you can show them transparency, as long as you can show them the reason behind certain actions, most of the times they will come around and say yes. Of course, there would be times when, you may have a idea that is too far ahead of its time and they may say no. But then, you take the yeses with the no's and you still weigh it up and you'll find that the yeses are more. So I think, this idea of inability to change is also something which is a mindset. It is not always the truth sort of cast in stone. It's not that.
As you speak about these initiatives, it's very clear that most of the things that you tried and succeeded at SBI are things that did not have a precedent and that you had to figure your way through it all by yourself. I think nothing signifies this or brings out this aspect better than the story about your business cards itself, which I think I mentioned in the introduction and a little earlier. Can you tell us in your own words what exactly happened at that time?
Actually, as soon as I got into office, I said that let's get the cards printed, and they printed as chairperson. And then the legal department said that, this is not something that you can do because we are a statutory corporation. We are controlled by an act of parliament. And in many times you have to sign affidavits, etc. And you will have to sign it as chairman because that is the appellation that appears in the act. Should you want to put the word chairperson over there, you will have to get the act amended. And amending an act in parliament is not an easy matter. There are a lot of consultations that go before that. You have to lay it in front of the parliament. There is a voting on it. So, it's a long process. You have to go to your own department, which will be the Department of Financial Services. They will seek the consent of the Reserve Bank because they're your regulator. Then it will have to go to the Law Ministry, and the Law Ministry will have to check whether this is something that will contravene this, that, and the other. And then the amendment will be put up. So I looked at the whole long paraphernalia, or rather I knew the whole long paraphernalia. And then I decided that, there were many more battles that I needed to fight. And this would not be the one big thing because, either way, it is not going to move the needle in any particular manner. So I decided, that there are big things and there are not so big things. And this is one of the not so big things. So that I put it aside and I decided that I needed to concentrate on many, many more things. So that's how I took the call that it's okay to be chairman. And chairman in its form doesn't really mean man. For that matter, the word woman also has man in it. We have not tried to make it wo person or anything of the sort. So, just accept it as it is. There are many more battles to fight. Let's concentrate on those. So those were my thoughts at that point of time.
Related to this, right? And I wanted to end with this question is, you speak about how when you look at banking as a sector today, a very healthy percentage, if I'm not wrong, I think it's about 33% are women, right? And, by the time it sort of goes to the top management, it sort of comes down to less than 5%. Right. And, as someone who represents the advertising and the communications industry, I've seen the exact same thing. In fact, at the entry level, there are more women who enter communications than men. And at the top level, it is an abysmal less than 10%. Right. I'm coming back to, where we started with the title of the book itself. Right. Given that this is a working woman's notes on different aspects of your life, there are obviously many different reasons why these numbers fall down. Right. But if you have to tell a mid-career woman, what can they take away from your experience? What would be your advice to her today?
So you are aware of the multiple reasons why these people fall off. Okay. One reason, of course, is the fact that, women's role as a primary caregiver sometimes makes it too difficult for them to bear both burdens. Okay. It's also a fact, and this is something that probably I didn't realize before I entered my current organization. There is also a lot of unconscious bias. Conscious bias, we recognize. Unconscious bias, we don't. And unconscious bias, it's not necessarily only with men, it can be with women as well. So to that extent, women, if they are not getting the kind of lifts in their career that they should get, if they find that just because of their gender, they are not getting ahead, whereas others, because they are of a different gender, they are getting ahead, it can frustrate women as well. A woman who, will push herself forward sometimes is considered too aggressive. A woman who will not push herself forward will again be considered somebody who's meek and submissive. How do you manage a balance where you are considered, to have the right kind of, initiative and not be a person who's merely pushing forward on account of, the advantage they are expecting to get because of they are of a different gender? It's often takes a lot of fine tuning as to how you are doing that. For instance, there was a time, and I've talked about it in my book, when some of my colleagues, my level colleagues, used to say that I'm very aggressive in my body language. And I used to think that, just because I'm a woman, they're saying this to me. Okay. But then, when at a management course in IIM Lucknow, they actually videographed all of us doing a group discussion, I realized that my body language was actually very aggressive. And because I realized it, then I started toning it down. Because that kind of an aggressive body language may have been required at the branches when I was fighting the unions. It was no longer required at higher levels. Okay. So, even a woman, for whatever she's doing, they need to balance. They need to be very careful about the way they are coming across. While they have to produce the results, they also need to ensure that they are actually not overdoing a few things. On the other hand, there are lots and lots of women, and this again I have actually tested and seen. If there are 10 people in a room, 5 men and 5 women, you offer a job to them or a task to them for which everybody is about 30% ready, and you ask for volunteers, all 5 men will volunteer, maybe 2 out of the 5 women will volunteer. So, women also have to ensure that they push themselves forward when the time comes, that they grab the opportunities when it is offered to them. Sometimes they don't do that. So there are very many multiple reasons why these happen. And I think all of this is something that only, time and consciousness that these problems exist, only these two things can sort of, be the solutions for changing the way we are, the situation we are, for ensuring that this stops being, such a leaky pipeline and that more and more women are able to get up there.
Thank you for that. And thank you for being so candid. I wanted to finish on a slightly lighter vein. And we usually ask our guests what he or she is watching, reading, or listening to at this point. Today you are obviously leading a different kind of a beast, so to say. And I don't assume that your the time that is required of you on a working day has come down at all. But how do you distract yourself? What are the things that you're watching, reading, or listening to these days?
So, as for reading, I'm currently reading a book called Breath by James Nestor. It was actually recommended to me by Nisha Godrej, and she was kind enough to send me a copy. And it's a fascinating book. I don't know whether you've read it. If you haven't, you should read it. It's really nice, really, really good. Okay. Regarding watching, well, I'm a little, I think, lowbrow in what I'm watching. So I go on Netflix and binge watch whatever comes my way. So whether it be, any of these TV series or maybe some of the movies that get recommended on the WhatsApp groups. So just watch. In fact, the last thing I watched was the last series of the last episodes of Crown, because that's so recent.
Yes.
So I thought I should look at. I had watched the earlier ones earlier, but this latest one I watched just recently. It's difficult to get used to different actors playing the same roles. You got to get used to the earlier actors, but whatever it is. So, I watch whatever I can there. And as for listening, the listening part happens very little. It's mostly when I'm on my morning walks and things like that. Try and listen to songs. If you ask me what kinds of songs, mostly it would be Bengali songs or they would be old Hindi film songs. So those are the two types that I normally prefer. So, yeah, That's what I listen to.
Since you mentioned Bengali and Hindi songs, I have a question. You're not a native Hindi speaker, and I assume that most of your professional life, especially when you're posted in rural North India or in many other places, you would have had to speak a lot of Hindi, isn't it? I'm just curious to know how you managed it and what you thought of the fact that you had to.
Though it is not native to me, but I have studied in Bihar, where, Hindi is very, of course, it's the language over
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And actually speaking in school, when I got into school, there were a number of people who were very good in, means I was in the second batch of that school. And already, the debating teams and the acting teams had sort of formed by the time I got in. So I wasn't getting a chance of getting a space in either the debating team or the acting team. And then it just so happened that one of those times, one of the persons in the Hindi debating team fell sick. And I suggested that I should take their place. And they knew that though I spoke Hindi well, I was a little insensitive to the gender. I was not a Hindi speaker by birth. So I used to get the genders wrong.
Like all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter was, because I get it wrong, but because I could sort of, carry on an argument, I was given a chance and we did excellently well. After which I became a regular in the Hindi debating team as well as in the Hindi dramatics team. So every year on the annual day, whatever was the play that was being done in Hindi, I'd 100% have a major role in it. So to that extent, well, Hindi speaking was a challenge, but not that great a challenge. Later on, of course, in the office, whenever I used to do these addresses, I would do them half in English, half in Hindi. And again, I used to, apologize because sometimes my Hindi is ungrammatical. But I don't really think that matters. If you really want to just convey what you are trying to say, and again, as I said, if you mean well, if you're passionate about it, people understand. And as long as they could understand, I was happy. So, yep, where it is required, I have no problem at all in speaking Hindi. If it is not required, it's an either or.
Right.
I speak quite a bit of English for that matter. I think that is the best way of explaining what we do in India. It is a mixture of Hindi and English.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think it's good because at the end of the day, there has to be one sort of language that binds us all together, something that everybody understands. Okay. So even if you have a number of pearls, you can't make a garland unless you have a string. Okay. So there has to be a string that strings it all together. So, language should be something like that. It doesn't always have to be something that everybody understands and is totally grammatical about. It's quite okay to speak Bollywood Hindi. As long as you are understood across the length and breadth of the country, I think it works. For that matter, say for instance, when I was in Karnataka, for any of these national days, I would like to speak a few sentences in Karnataka, okay, in Kannada. And if I wanted to speak a few sentences in Kannada and I didn't know Kannada, they would write it out for me. And I found that if they wrote it out to me for me in the Devanagari script, that is the Hindi script, I would be able to say them much better than if they wrote it out for me in the English script, in the Latin script. Okay, so there is a contiguity in the languages that are spoken across our country, that are native to our country. Okay, and therefore it is easier for the people at large to learn these languages. Having said that, do I mean that English shouldn't be taught? Not at all. I think just as we want to connect with our people in our country, we also want to connect globally. And English is the language that connects us globally. So I think, being multilingual is a great thing. And in fact, I think there is proven research that shows you that people who are multilingual from a very young age, they actually are, have a better understanding and better ability to absorb knowledge than people who speak a single language. So just like being ambidextrous is good for your brain, so learning multiple languages is also good for the brain. So to that extent, I think, both English and Hindi should be propagated. But having said that, I don't think it should be one or the other. Yes, for the masses at large, I think Hindi is still easier. So let's go with the easier one first and bring the second one in subsequently. But anybody who wants to learn English, I think we should make the arrangements to make it easy for them to learn that, because it is something that enables us to connect with the world. And the more that we can communicate, the more powerful we will.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Arundhati, thank you so much. This has been one of the most inspiring conversations I've had on the show. Thank you for the book. And more than anything else, thank you so much for being candid and sharing your experiences with you. We're truly grateful for that. Thank you. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And Filter_Koffee, that's coffee with a K, on Instagram.